So the trial, through trials, we actually learn and can become stronger. And I have a lot of stories in my book that I've shared where had I not had the trial, I wouldn't have been able to do what I did. And it sounds crazy and it's really tough, but as a believer, you just believe that God's in it. And I said to my boys during 2008, if God shuts us down, he's got another plan for us.
Well, welcome to the Found podcast. My name's Lorie, and thanks for joining us here. We are having an amazing time of learning, of being inspired by people's stories. And today, you are not going to be disappointed. I think I'm super excited about this interview. You're going to meet Richard Magnussen. He's a visionary leader whose legacy actually spans business, faith, and family. And he's the retired CEO of Magnussen Home. He helped build one of the most expansive global furniture companies. Get this, supplying over 150,000 pieces monthly across 20 plus countries. Now, I have no idea what all that means, but I'm going to ask Richard about that. And his leadership at Magnussen Home, it's really Canada's largest supplier, and it has operations in North Carolina, in Ontario, where I'm located, in California, and also Vietnam. Well, beyond business, Richard is a mentor, and he's the author of his newly released book, Going Big, inspiring others to pursue bold faith and family values. And him and his wife, Marilyn, well, they've been married 53 years, people. Catch that. They live in Waterloo, Ontario, not far from me, but right now he has the privilege of being in Naples, Florida, which I wish I was there. He's got 10 grandkids, so twice as many as I have. Richard, welcome to the Found podcast. I'm delighted to have you here.
Oh, thank you.
We're fellow Canadians and we have something in common. I'm from a family business as well. So you know what? We can probably relate on some of the good, bad, and the ugly with all of that, right?
We can. It's life.
It's life. I want to hear your story. But first of all, I want to ask about this book that you've just recently written, Going Big. It's a big, bold title, Why did you write this book and who's it for?
Well, interestingly, the title was one of the things I struggled with because as a believer, I think we need to be humble, and going big sounds like it's not. But I had a team working on it, and we concluded that when you get through and into the book, going big means giving everything to the Lord and doing it right with excellence. And so that's really what you'll find when you get into the book. And so why I wrote the book, it started off, my lovely wife has encouraged me for 5 years to write my story, which was probably the last thing I wanted to do. But she made a good point, and I followed her wisdom, and I wrote this book. And it was intended for my grandchildren and children, sort of as a legacy, showing them that lots of experience in the world, in marketplace, in the business world. We're missionaries wherever we are. And so I did that for my kids and grandkids and friends. And then the editor that was working with me suggested that it has a bigger audience. And so I followed that lead. And we're just believing God to use it the way he wants to use it, or put it on a dusty shelf, whatever.
You know what? I've started it. I thought I might do a quick skim and scan. Us media people, we read a lot of books. And Richard, I'm not putting it down. I'm actually getting a copy for all of my siblings we're all involved in our family business. I know that my parents are going to want to read it. And thank you for writing it down. I think we need more of these stories to teach us. Take us back and tell us about your family background. I love sort of how you begin the book and you start talking about, how this family business started. But yeah, tell us a little bit about the family history before even the business started. Like, who were your parents?
Right. Well, my father started the business in 1931. He immigrated from Germany and then lost his job during the Depression, bought a chicken coop and lived in half. And the other half, he had some machinery and he started making woodworking for upholstery show arms. So like anything that has wood on an arm of upholstery, that's what he made the frames. And then he went into making occasional tables for one of the largest circuses in the world, actually, at least in North America, and selling magazine racks that were given away for 75. He sold them for 75 cents. So it goes back to then. And he wanted to retire, and I worked in the business, sweeping floors at 10. And then as a student in high school, I worked after schools. And so I learned the business, and I actually learned really how to build a piece of furniture from my father, working hand in hand in a very small shop. And then in 1970, my dad said, I really do want to retire. I don't want to push you in the business because you got to love it. And I wasn't sure whether I wanted to do that or go become an architect or a builder of buildings. And but I said, I've got the opportunity here, a small shop. And I told my dad I thought it would be boring. And he just smiled. And so we got into it, and the business started to grow. It was just quite overwhelming in the beginning because I was sort of in charge of everything. I only had a couple part-time people when I started. We added some students to work part-time like I did as a student. And so that's the humble beginnings. And it has not turned out to be boring.
Well, certainly not. And if I know anything about family businesses, having also myself being in one, my dad was a maritimer and came up to Ontario with $15 in his pocket, and got a job at millwork, and then, decided to buy one lot and build one house and then sell that and buy another lot, build another, just like hard work. I know a little bit about founders of businesses, and they're drivers and they're pushers and they're self motivated. And when you describe your dad in the book, I'm thinking, wait, is this my father? Like, hardest worker you'd ever know, but maybe not the easiest guy to work for. Can we just be really honest here? How did you get along as that son and father,
My father and I got along really well, actually. And by the way, I've got his little story that he wrote. It was about 18 pages on foolscap. In the back of my book, so that the history is not lost. My dad and I actually got along very well, but my dad was a perfectionist, and people couldn't work for him for a long period of time because he always saw the perfection. And so he was a little bit hard on people, where I challenged that in my own mind. I worked well with him, but that was a struggle to grow the business in the past, his past. But he was an incredible craftsman. And so that I learned real quick. My family says I got my drive from my father and my being able to work with people from my mother. So that I was starting a new generation. But we worked well together. And before he passed, I took him to Asia, where a lot of the production was being done. And he was amazed, actually.
I bet. I can't imagine for him to see all that's transpired in that business from those humble beginnings. And I think there's something to be said about being the founder, don't you? That, and also a generation. It was that generation, whether you're an immigrant or, you're starting off with nothing, and it takes a tenacity. Do you think that the generational, like I see the shift even in our generation and our family business, like, dealing with people versus creating the product, like there's a sort of maybe a mixed approach there.
I mean, they really, when your father probably started building homes, they maybe had a carport or no garage at all. Then they went to, our generation, where you had at least a single garage, probably 2 and 3. And down here, there's a lot of four garages to a home. So yeah, they were pioneers, and my dad lost his job in the Depression, newly immigrated, had to learn the language.
Yeah.
They persevered.
What's the biggest lesson you think you learned from him?
My father was very much, he would say to me, the impossible we do right away, the miraculous is going to take a little longer. And that was his, he would always say that when we came to a problem. And I learned that from him, and that was an attitude that he had. And I've not lost that. I've worked with my kids and say, okay, that doesn't seem right. That's an opportunity to learn. Let's figure out how to solve it, and we'll be better for it.
Yeah. You know what? My lesson, my dad would always say, do the hard thing first.
Yes, that's a good thing too.
Right? If you
Is.
want to procrastinate, he was a man of lists, but it's like, do the hard thing first. And I have held on to that in my life. And I think that's where some of the tenacity and perseverance comes in a generation where they've had to work so hard for something. What do you see? I know I'm jumping a bit. I'm going to bring us back to the story, but what do you see about generational just perspectives on business? Like, you've now got your kids in the business. What shifted even in the mindset of, like, from the founder, the one who started with nothing, to the next generation, and then on now to the third? What do you see?
My father was very careful I had to earn my money as a young person. I just didn't get an allowance. I had to do chores. And I think what I've learned is entitlement can be a very, very risky thing. You can want to do better for your children. I'm speaking to myself. And you want to give them the best. You can actually afford to give them the best at some point in your life. But it's not always wise to do that. So I always had my kids engaged in earning a portion of it. And that's how my dad taught me. And some of my friends would get big allowances, and I didn't get such a big allowance, and I had to work for it, and they didn't. But on the hindsight, I see that, and I've had my kids tell me the same. So I think that's a risk in such a blessed, affluent country that we live in. No matter what economic status you are in Canada or the U.S., we have a lot more than our parents did.
Yeah. No, I think there's a lot of wisdom to that. Sounds, I was raised very similar. It was basically get a job. And I remember my job, my dad moved from building homes to building shopping center, like strip malls. And, I was the garbage girl. I mean, we all were. There's 4 kids, and we had to pick up garbage after school and, go empty the garbage bins and sweep up the parking lots. And get this, I made $25 a week. Like, this was big money, but it was all part of this work ethic, a high work ethic and value. And I'm so grateful for it. I can see it's it's been brought into each one of our families. And you're right about entitlement. How did you manage then? Did you bring your kids into the business right away in your years, or?
They wanted to come in, so I said the standard line my father said is, look, you got to love what you do. And but they seemed to like it, and my son, in his case, he came into us, and we sent him out to a major retailer to work for a year to understand what it is like to sell the furniture. And he learned an awful lot about importance of service. So we did that, and we sent my son-in-law and daughter to the Philippines to learn international manufacturing. And so they got a big picture, schooling, but more importantly in the job and being worked through the different, my kids never reported to me. They always reported to somebody else. And I would always say, listen, if you want to do me a favor, make them work. And don't give them a pass just because they got their last name right. So they didn't, and they worked hard.
You know what? That's a really good, I think there's people listening and going, man, maybe I've fallen into some of those pitfalls, or maybe we've just made things too easy or too hard. I mean, we'll talk more about the business side, but I want to go back to your family. You talk a lot about, your faith, your family. Like, take us back to you as a young boy. Like, when did you come to put your faith in Jesus? Was faith part of your growing up?
Yeah, my parents went to a good church, Bible teaching church, and so from a very young child, I went through the children's programs, and I remember being on the street and someone threw a cigarette out of the car. It was still lit. I went and smoked it, But I had such a guilt feeling, and I went home, and my mom had part of a prayer meeting in the house with ladies, and I remember sharing it, and my mother and another lady led me to Jesus. For probably 5 years old, 6 maybe.
Wow.
A very simple understanding, but I felt the guilt. I knew that there was sin. I knew that I shouldn't be doing that. And today, I tell my daughter, they just freak out because of the germs and bacteria. But that was how I came to know Jesus. And then
Wow.
throughout my life growing up, as I said, I worked part-time, but I also was in the church serving in young people's. I often would become part of the leadership team. And I went from that to leading the boys' club in the church. And then I went from there to being a very young deacon in my mid-20s, and which was a surprise to me and a lot of people. But so I started there, and that church didn't have elders. And so then I've been an elder for over 40 years on top of that. So being engaged in the game of the church is really important. And what you learn working with people and leadership, I mean, I can pay bonuses to people that work for me, but when you're working in a church, you've got to have a lot more than being able to pay them. You've got to give them vision, big picture, here's the mission, and encourage them, and that it's not, and you do that in your own business, but it's like you don't have a big bonus that they're incentivized. Actually, there is a big bonus, serving the Lord, but they don't always understand it at the beginning. So I learned a lot of leadership through the church.
I think you've hit a big point there, Richard. I think you're right. When you're serving in ministry, whether it's a church or, anywhere where you're relying on volunteers, you don't have the bonus check you can't give them, right? You can't motivate them with money. And so some of the greatest lessons in leadership are learned in that environment. And would you say that, some of it may be equally so, but the lessons you learned through ministry, through dealing with volunteers, through serving in a church, from a young boy right through your, years of working, were they as significant or maybe more significant than even the lessons you learned in business?
Well, certainly in the beginning years, because the business was very small. And I was paralleling working in the church, and just really clear from my perspective, the church is not a spectator sport. The church is one where you serve people and serve God and serve people. And so I don't know that I totally understood that when I was that young, but I was always involved and always learning. And I was always amazed at what I was learning at a fairly young age of how to manage people, how not to manage people. And so it was very helpful.
Yeah, I think my greatest lessons have been learned in ministry environments as well. I had the privilege of working with John Maxwell, a guy who's written a few books on leadership, and wonderful, right? And John's heart is so much for really people like you who are people of faith, followers of Jesus, but working in the marketplace, working in business. So how did some people separate their faith from their work, Richard. They separate it, especially it can be tempting, I'm sure, when you're successful and you're running this business and it takes a lot of work. What was the conviction that is very clear in your life that faith was all a part of every aspect of your life? Was it always that way, or was there a time when you really made that shift?
Well, if I go to the business part, it had a big influence on really committing my life and committing my business to the Lord. After I started in 1970, our annual sales were $38,000 a year, but quickly business started picking up. I had energy. Go to Toronto. I would sell furniture stores. I was doing it all, actually, a lot of things, but I became overwhelmed. And I remember one day kneeling in the factory, little shop, and saying, "Lord, this is bigger than me. I need you as a partner." And it was. I can remember the spot and location as today, so it was real. Nothing magic happened. But I had a peace. I could sleep better at night. And then a couple of weeks later, I was in a service, and there was a missionary that had a project in Africa. And the Lord convicted me that I had saved $5,000 for our first home, my wife and I, Marilyn. And he said, you need to give that. So at first, my thinking was, boy, this partnership is not going in the right direction. But what I learned was I had this idea that I would become wealthy and give, then start giving. And that my partner saw as a different way. So I thought Marilyn would actually say, well, can we give half of it? I was kind of hoping she might. That's the bad side of the way I was thinking. But she said, no, if God's telling us to give it, we need to give it. So we did. And I'm not one of prosperity gospel, but I can tell you that, and not even thinking about it throughout the year, we ended up with 3 times as much to do a much better job on the first furnishing of our new home. So I know you can't outgive the Lord, but that was this basic struggle that I had that I needed to understand and get things right. And so God is like that. He will work with you. He will confront you, and we need to be sensitive to it. So I saw that early on. There was a newspaper, and I shared in the book, that would come and do articles on our small company, and in Kitchener Record at the time. And he was amazed that I would always share about God involved in the business. You know, in those days, we were increasing business by 1,000%. Well, small numbers, it's easy to go big percentages. But he was really interested in the fact that I would share the God story with the business story. And so that became real. And through that process in that local newspaper, I realized that he was intrigued and other people were intrigued. I didn't see why, because to me, it was a real personal relationship with God. And I had committed to him that this was our business, him and mine. So I believed that at a fairly young age in my 20s. And I still remember those today. And in my book, I go through my broken neck. I go through many stories in business that are absolute. They're not coincidence, they're miracles. And even people who work for me that weren't necessarily followers paid attention when certain things happened. So, and in hindsight now, it's easy to believe.
Yeah.
But you still got to be committed daily to it.
Yeah.
Very easily you can start your own direction.
I think you hit something right there when you said, you thought once you made the money, then you'd give to God. And when we look at the character of God, like he wants our hearts first, right? And you really set your heart on things above, as scripture said. And all these things will be added unto you. That's what I hear in your story, is this value of, I'm going to put God first. And that's a huge lesson and not an easy one. Like for many of us, we put God first once we've made the money. So like, what was another key lesson you learned? You mentioned some miracles. Do you have a miracle story? Like tell us one of the stories of how this business then grew, like leaps and bounds.
We grew and early on, I would go to Toronto and I could say to myself, you're not coming home until you earn your sales wage, even though I didn't get a sales commission. I would have been paying it to somebody else. I remember going through, and then I had enough nerve to go into Leon's furniture store, which probably most Canadians know who that is. And they were probably a chain of about 5. And Mr. Leon, Ed Leon, I really, when I look back, had nothing really that I was offering him in furniture, but he saw, I think, a young person that was willing to work hard and make certain products. And so he gave me a lot of coaching of what to build for Leon's, and I did. And we matched, I made just occasional tables, coffee tables, end tables at that time, and I matched upholstery that he was buying with pine wood arms. And they sold like crazy. So he was very, very supportive of me in the industry and really gave me a break. He was tough, and he was a tough buyer, but I think he liked me because I had a work ethics and I was willing to serve and I was willing to give the customer what they wanted. And that's a real key part of business. And so we made products, and Leon's grew, and Leon's actually owns the brick now. For people that may not know that, they own both stores.
Yeah.
And so we grew in the Canadian world of business, and that was one of my big starts. Now, probably one of the things that stands out in my people's, or the people that worked for me, was in 2008 when the world was crushing with bank problems, and 2009, and we had banks that wouldn't talk to each other from Asia because they were afraid they wouldn't get paid. I watched the weekend of that, but our bank, pulled back because furniture is a risk, right? People don't have to buy furniture. So they backed away from us, and they wanted us to find another bank. Well, you can't find another bank. So we ended up having to go to somebody that we were paying 18% on a large amount of money back then. And, the bank was going to, put us under. And then we had a lawsuit that was 13 years old. And miraculously, it took 13 years. It was interesting. The judge hit his head when he's riding his bike. It was just, they changed the lawyers on the other side 4 times. And anyways, miraculously, the week the bank was going to step in on us and said, you need to put this much money in to the business, we won that suit for the same amount of money.
Wow.
And you can say that's coincidence, but that case was 13 years old, and it ended right in the week that we needed the cash to do that. The bank was even shocked because my advisor said, don't put your money in because he will possibly close you up regardless. But anyways, we got through that. But that was a miraculous thing. It was a lot of money actually at the time.
What do you say to people that they're running a business? Maybe, it's just a small startup right now, but people are afraid. They're afraid even in the economy that we're facing right now. You've lived a few of those ups and downs in the economy, the political scene, the global issues around the world. What would you say to people now that are facing our times and they're running businesses?
I would say, and we were leveraged more than we should have been at the time. So I would say, watch how leveraged you are to grow your business, because banks are your friend until they are no longer your friend, because they get told from head office, pull back on these industries because they're at risk. And rightly so, businesses like that. So watch your leverage, watch your indebtedness. And, I've had a whole lot of failures, and I deal with that in my book, personal failures and that. But I always like to say, fail forward. You've learned a lesson. And I remember my daughter coming for her first job, and she was working for somebody that was an interesting boss. But she'd come home and expect me to agree that she was a terrible boss. And I said, good, you're getting a good lesson. She looked at me and said, what are you talking about? I said, you're learning what not to do.
Yeah.
And my daughter did go on to start her own business, and she learned a lot.
Yeah.
And so her paradigm changed from all that negative that she was receiving, which probably she was correct on, but she learned a lot what not to do. And that's how we have to look at those circumstances and make the change.
Okay, tell us one of them. You do share quite a few in your book, just these humbling experiences. I mean, it's not all roses, when you're building a business, and even personally, what were some of the lessons in your life that you learned, some of the humbling things that God taught you through business and also through family?
Well, one of the ones as we grew in Canada, it was common to steal someone's design from the US because they were the big guys, and we would copy their design and then we'd sell it in Canada because we weren't doing business in the US. But I really was convicted that that's stealing. And I was convicted that I need to apologize and make restitution in the way of whatever they wanted, actually. And so I called those CEOs, and they were big companies, one in California, one in Ohio. And we were just like this on the radar as far as size. And I miraculously got the CEO direct, first call. And I was shocked because a lot of times you leave a message or whatever. And I explained to him that I had stolen his designs and I wanted to make restitution. And he was shocked. I don't think shocked because our industry does it. He was shocked that I was calling him to say, I'm sorry, and I want to pay for the use of his design. And he basically said, well, donate the money to your favorite charity.
Wow.
And whatever royalty you think that is deserved. And amazingly, I called the next one and I got a hold of that CEO. And he said exactly the same thing. I mean, they were fierce competitors. They didn't, I don't think, talk to each other a lot. But it was just amazing. And so what I learned through that was if you copy someone's design, first of all, it's not right. But the second thing you learn is you're going to have a lower price to get the business from the retailer, from the original. And then your margins are lower. And what we did is we turned from stealing the design to paying designers to design new creative product. And our margins went up. And we had retailers starting to come in to see what we were because we were very much showing new and different products. And so your margins and your profitability and all that become better. And I learned that actually through that. But it was, I remember trying to dial those phone numbers. It took me a couple of times because I was so nervous. But I think God blessed that and showed me really how to do well.
Yeah.
Not just do the same old.
You know what? That's a remarkable story. I mean, I just hear in that too, the lesson of integrity. And I'm sure you've been in business a long time. I'm sure you've seen a lot of lack of integrity. And what would you say, what is the importance of integrity? And as you say, to fail forward, but the importance of integrity when running any business?
I would say that when I see things and I see things that were sort of cheated on, or I see somebody doing something, I'll say to my wife, boy, that's, for those $300, that's how low your integrity is. I'm not telling them, I'm not judging them, but I just keep reminding myself, boy, you don't want to sell yourself out for any amount of money.
Right.
And integrity, people want to follow people with integrity. And we had very many dedicated people in our company. And I used to say to my wife, boy, they will die on a hill for me. I got to make sure I'm out there on the right hill. And so that you get that business is all about people, and people's about relationship, and relationships built on integrity.
That's so good.
And I am not perfect, because when you see all the things I did wrong in my book,
there's a few number of them. Tell us another thing you did wrong. We like to hear the did wrong stories,
I have a very long wick. I don't get upset very easy, but one time I was at home and we were having dinner and I had to get off to an elders meeting, something really spiritual at the church. I don't know what the issue was. My wife wouldn't even remember what the issue was. But I got really angry in front of her at the kids. And then there was a little pushback and I ripped the countertop off the island.
What?
And yeah, I didn't know I was that strong. I didn't feel like it. And the kids were all sitting there and, of course, saying nothing. And now I'm running off to an elders meeting to lead church, lead people. And so I had to go back and apologize to my wife, and I had to apologize to my kids. They would remember that. They were probably 12 to 15, and they did remember that. But I think that's where God's redemption is. When we know we're wrong, we say we're sorry. That is actually a pretty strong lesson.
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't think it really happened. Not that we didn't have differences, but that was probably one that surprised me. But I don't know. Maybe I had lots of things on the go and something wasn't just right, but there's no excuse for it. But it was a lesson to me, and my family learned from it. My wife did forgive me. And
you got a good wife.
Yeah.
I'm assuming you rebuilt that countertop, so it was even stronger.
Well, I had someone that didn't completely come off, but it was 3/4 off, and they were able to just screw it back down, glue and screw it back down. So there's a cost to those sort of things, right?
Right, exactly. Any regrets? My dad is a man of, regrets. I should have done. He says he was a deacon at the church too, and he said, I was at the church too often. I should have been home with my kids. I was doing too much at the church, and I was like, I mean, I know I have a good dad, but any regrets? Like, do you feel like sometimes it's easy to get, the business and even the church involvement ahead of family? What have you learned? Family's a huge priority for you.
It is. It's God first, family second. I had an incredible wife who was a stay-at-home mom. She covered a lot of things, and I traveled a lot. I traveled Asia. I was gone for 3 weeks sometimes. In those days, the flights weren't as quick as they are today. But when my kids were in their 20s, I asked them, was I a dad that was, because I was concerned about exactly what you just said. And they said, no, Dad, you took us out for dates. And of course, Marilyn was setting me up when I came home from Asia with all the things. And you need to have a talk with, Lisa on this one, or Kelly. And so I would have a little background. They were always amazed, and the other thing I did was, when I was home, I was always at their sports game. All my kids played sports. And I was often one of few dads there. There's more mothers because, but I made that a real point and lesson. And that came on the back end of my daughter. She said, no, you always were on top of the issues with me, and you always were at my game. Now, I know I probably wasn't always at the game, but her impression was. So you got to balance that. And as a couple, you can get a heads up from the other side. If one's doing something and busy, you got to cover it off.
It's good. I just feel like Marilyn, she's a good woman. You've been blessed, and it is teamwork, especially when you're running a business, because the commitment is high, and you're not just punching a clock, right?
Right.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. You've experienced a lot of success. Actually, take me back. How did you get into the U.S. market? Like, we're these Canadian companies, and right now we don't really want to talk about tariffs and all that, but how does this really seemingly small Canadian company get into the U.S. and now global? Like, how did that happen?
Well, we were sort of forced to it. We had a manufacturing facility in New Hamburg, and the EPA, which is the environmental, came to us, and because we filtered our dust coming out of the factory in these big towers, and they had pistons that made loud noises, and the town at the same time was letting the residents come in around us. And so they said we were violating a noise violation. And so that was a tough one, because to relocate, and at that point we had already started doing some international furniture, buying overseas. I hadn't started selling overseas yet. But it was a really hard time for me to make a decision eventually to shut down the factory. But I really didn't have a choice, and to invest the money wouldn't have made sense the way the environment and where things were going. So at the time I'd said, Lord, I don't know why you're pushing me out of this business. And so on hindsight, it actually opened up, because at that point we only made occasional tables. Today Magnussen makes a full line of furniture, bedroom, dining room. So we opened up. We have our own designers. We manufacture globally. We have our own office and people in the factories managing it. So what I thought was a hardship became an amazing story of how we could go from a small amount of shipping. And that allowed us to be competitive into the US market. And today I would say that their business is probably 85% US, and 20 other countries would be the other. And we moved into Saudi Arabia and make furniture for them. And there we do upholstery for them as well. But in North America, we do not do soft goods or anything that's upholstery, sofa goods.
So what I'm hearing you say, I think it's very timely in a time when, we're facing some interesting political things happening in Canada with our good neighbor in the US, and businesses are struggling to know where they stand and how to grow and what the strategy is. What's your advice to these young, maybe businesses or Canadian companies now that have really relied on their U.S. market in some ways? And what's your advice to them, if any? Or we just...
Well, it is really tough. It really is tough. I do think, though, they can't put everybody out of business, and the Canadian government has to change a lot of policies. I think we've been spending money on not managing our overhead in the country, because we have a lot going for us. I think I've been saying, and I know a lot of manufacturers in Canada, and we've had many discussions, and automotive suppliers and that. I think hold the course, but I do think some of this hardship is going to make us smarter, better as a country. I mean, we have huge resources that are needed by the U.S. and the world. And we've been kind of forcing people not to use them. And, that pipeline across Canada should have been there a long time ago. We shouldn't be trading tax between provinces. All those things are being talked about because they're good, smart things to talk about, but they should have been done a long time ago. So the trial, through trials, we actually learn and can become stronger. And I have a lot of stories in my book that I've shared where, had I not had the trial, I wouldn't have been able to do what I did. And it sounds crazy and it's really tough, but as a believer, you just believe that God's in it. And I said to my boys during 2008, if God shuts us down, he's got another plan for us. Well, he didn't. He provided that money right on time, and we grew really fast. And I could get into the details of the plan we put together. God, and I don't know exactly what we're doing now. We had a strategy, but he really blessed it by being tough times in 2008. That's when we really grew. And that's crazy, because nobody needs to buy furniture when the market is tough. But we really grew in that time frame, which was a miracle.
Well, what I'm hearing you say is, stay the course and focus, put your trust in God, right? In all of these things. There's many things that are out of our control, whether we're business owners or, just working for another business or people in ministry. We got to know that there's those things that only God can do. And I just love your story of faithfulness, and the fact that you have put your faith and your family ahead of, a lot of priorities in business, which could have overtaken you. Let me ask you this. On this podcast, Richard, we talk a lot about identity. And I find that people I talk to that are, hardworking business people, a lot of their identity, meaning our value and worth, we get defined by often the things we do. You're a businessman, this is the things, hi, I'm Richard, and this is what I do. It's probably been a lot of, your way you've identified yourself. Would you say that that's somewhat true for you, or how have you dealt with that in your life?
I don't think you can take away, if you've done something all your life, that you're identified with it.
Yeah.
But I'm identified as being in the furniture business. I'm also defined by being in church leadership. And I'm on, I think, three boards, ministry boards, and I'm a president of our condo. So I'm defined, maybe it's crazy, I don't know, but I'm defined as not just furniture. And I talk to people about retirement, and they all said, boy, you can read the newspaper and you can do that for maybe a month. My case, it was a lot less. But I started, actually doing fixer-uppers, buying homes and fixing them up. I had wanted to have a purpose for my life. And with purpose and being in the marketplace, you get to meet a lot of people. And a lot of people need Jesus. Sometimes I wish I'd be better at introducing them to it. But part of this book is the reason I want to say there's a hard case for putting your faith in God, not to get, but to get through life. And so I've actually been able to share it with a few people. It's just recently out, so it'll be interesting.
That's
Some
fantastic.
of them don't know how to handle it, but it opens up great discussion.
Yep. And you know what? That's part of being, like I heard you say at the beginning, we're all missionaries wherever God puts us. And so much about retirement for someone like you, because I don't even know if you can actually say that. My dad could never actually pronounce the word retirement. Like there was just, it wasn't in his vocabulary. But what I hear you saying is purpose. Whatever season we're in, you've got to have a purpose, and following Jesus gives us our purpose, does it not?
Big time. And you can use it in sort of your specialty, the crowd that you're in. You can go to other crowds. There's no question about that. But you really have people that you know as a result of your work and church. So yeah, so it's a mixed combination.
Yeah, it's good. 53 years of marriage. What have you learned?
Boy, I'm still learning. It's not over. I did sign a contract for another 50 years at 50. What have I learned? I've learned it's 100%, and it's not 50-50. It's 100% each side to make a marriage. I've learned that. And I've learned that women think different than men, contrary to some. But and we need to be sensitive. But the best illustration I've seen presented is if you look at a triangle and the husband and the wife are at the bottom corners, and God at the top triangle. The closer you get to him, the closer you are to each other.
Yeah. And
I really think that is one of the key things. Marilyn would have us going to marriage conferences, well, once a year, sometimes once every 2 years, to learn things. And she was a big reader in the whole area of raising kids and marriage and all that. And so you have to work at it. You have to learn. And I think it's like anything else. You have to work at it. But
it's good.
100%.
That's really good. What do you want for your grandchildren, Richard?
In my book, I wrote a blessing to each one of them. And throughout the book, I put in scripture, a lot of Proverbs, because I spend a lot of time on Proverbs. I want them to know that God can walk with them, and that life is not my work or my school and then my church, and so that's separated. It doesn't work that way. It's a combination, and God uses both sides to mold us. And not always was I getting that right all the time, but I think I can see how that really molds. The potter's clay, and we get molded. That's very true, and we do it through not being on the sideline waiting for God to answer a miracle. We're moving in a direction. A car is easy to steer when it's moving, not when it's standing still. So I think, and I think God can use many things that we're passionate about. We pray about it, but we're not always clear, but we start moving.
Yeah.
And He'll direct us.
Yeah, so good. That is so good. And I love the blessings. I saw these blessings in your book, and I got thinking, okay, I got half as many as you. I got 5 grandkids, okay? And I'm like, that really inspired me. And thinking about what is my role in passing my faith on, to the next generation, and what kind of example am I living in my life and the way in which I work or play or, just serve others and love God. And you get to a grandparent, you get a bit of a different perspective, don't you? You're not as busy in some ways, although I don't know if I'm not, but it's a real blessed time. You enjoying your time in the season of your life?
Right. Yeah, we really are. And, the parents are responsible for it. But I once took a course, and I'm not even sure it wasn't a John Maxwell, where they interviewed CEOs, and the number one influence on a young person's life was the grandfather. I thought I was over when I, passed the kids and they started having their own children, but it's really true. And we have a pretty tight relationship with all our grandchildren. They love coming down here. They love bringing their fellow students on reading week, and we just have a ball with them when they're down here and sit around the table, talk about what's going on in their lives.
Yeah.
Quite honestly, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
With older people, they talk about aches and pains. This crowd's trying to figure out how to solve the world problems.
Right.
And it gives us great opportunity to influence them. So
keeps you young, right, Richard?
Keeps us very young.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Thank you for writing this book, for taking the time today. I just feel it's just such an inspiring story to hear. Good reminders to live our life, like you say, not sort of compartmentalizing our work and then our ministry or our family or our church. Like, it's all part of the same thing. And just your humility and how you've learned some of the hard lessons. I'm sure there's more to learn, but also the fact that you can live in this next season with purpose. And I think that's inspiring. A lot of people especially, high performing people get to this phase of their life and they're not happy. They're stuck in who they were and they have a hard time to move forward. Any closing thoughts for us, Richard?
Well, to that point, I know a lot of people that are fairly wealthy, especially down here in Naples, and not all of them are that happy because they can buy anything, but they need purpose. And I'm hoping this book will help them. And the other, I have notice in there, Rick Warren's book, Purpose-Driven Life, that I linked to, that they can go and get that copy, because I think that's a great book for that person. But yeah, God is good. I love life. I don't want it to slow down. I mean, slow meaning I don't want to be bored. I want to continue.
Right.
And so.
It's really good. Some people might wonder, well, who's running the business these days? What does it look like that you're down in Naples, driving around in your boat? Who's taking care of family business?
Well, my son and daughter-in-law, they're running it. And we had a good management team. And the year before I retired, I kind of let them all run things to see where the bumps were. And they were doing such a good job, I needed to get out of the way. And so they're doing well. Now they've had some bumps, after COVID. COVID was great, business was booming, but then after that, everybody was canceling orders because they had too much. So they're working through all of those problems, but they're doing a great job.
That's fantastic. Well, God bless you in this season. Where can people get the book, Richard?
Well, it's pretty well up on most sites, on Amazon.ca, Amazon.com, Books are Normal, and what's the Canadian one? I want to call it Chapters, but it's Indigo.
Indigo, that's right.
Most online, it's there.
Well, it certainly is, and it's called Going Big. And it's a great story of inspiration. I'm so glad you wrote it down. It's going to bless more people than the grandkids, but I'm really glad that was the motivation. Thanks for joining us today, Richard, and for your story. And I think you've given some encouragement to some hardworking Canadians up here. It's a little colder today, but the sun is coming out, and we just need to keep leaning into, who God made us to be and be a missionary wherever we are, right?
There's a big upside. When things are down, the testimony of a person that loves God, people will come to them and ask, why are you so positive?
Yeah.
And you'll have an opportunity to share with them, and God will open doors.
Amen to that. Well, thanks so much, Richard, for joining us. God bless you. And thanks for joining us on the Found podcast.